The impossible patient, the alarm screamed through Nex's medical station with a kind of urgency that made everyone's hearts skip a beat. Dr. Sarah Chen looked up from her research notes, already reaching for her medical kit before the announcement even finished echoing through the corridors. Emergency medical transport arriving at Docking Bay 7. All medical personnel to stations. Priority Alpha protocol in effect. Priority Alpha meant someone was dying. On Nexus Station, the galaxy's most advanced medical facility, that usually meant they had minutes to save a life. Sarah had been working here for 2 years, treating patients from dozens of different species. But Priority Alpha calls still got her adrenaline pumping. She jogged through the pristine white corridors, passing the familiar sight of alien medical staff hurrying to their positions. The Zephyrians moved with their characteristic grace, their blue-scaled hands already prepping equipment. The mollusk delegation shuffled along on their many legs, their tentacles organizing supplies with impressive efficiency. Everyone knew their role in the carefully choreographed dance of emergency medicine. The transport bay doors hissed open just as Sarah arrived, and what she saw made her blood run cold. The incoming ship was a wreck. Scorch marks covered its hull, and emergency foam was still leaking from what looked like critical system failures. Whatever had happened out there, it had been violent. Medical team to Emergency Bay 1, came Dr. Veloth's voice over the comm system. The station's chief medical officer rarely sounded shaken, but there was definitely tension in his usually calm tone. We have an ... unusual situation. Sarah made her way to Emergency Bay 1, where she found the entire senior medical staff clustered. Around the viewing window, beside the sealed chamber, she could see the reason for their concern. On the examination table lay a creature that shouldn't have been there according to every protocol the station had. The patient was massive, easily 7 feet long, even lying down. His body was covered in dark, almost black fur that seemed to absorb the medical bay's bright lights. Powerful muscles were visible, even through his thick coat, and his hands ended in claws that could probably tear through the station's hull plating. This was a Catherian, one of the galaxy's most feared apex predator species. How did he get here? Sarah asked, pressing closer to the window. Dr. Veloth, a tall, thin creature with pale green skin and large eyes that marked him as descended from herbivore stock, shook his head nervously. A damaged transport ship dropped him off and immediately jumped to hyperspace. No explanation, no medical records, nothing. What are his injuries? We haven't been able to get close enough to properly examine him, admitted Dr. Pixtel, the station's trauma specialist. Her feathers were fluffed out in obvious distress. Every time someone approaches, he becomes agitated. Sarah looked at the monitors displaying the Catherian's vital signs. His heart rate was elevated, breathing was labored, and the thermal imaging showed clear signs of internal trauma. Most concerning were the obvious external wounds she could see even from this distance. Energy burns covered his torso, and there was what looked like shrapnel embedded in his shoulder. He's bleeding internally, she said. Those burns need immediate treatment, and that shrapnel has to come out, or he'll develop sepsis. Dr. Chen? Dr. Veloth said carefully. We've contacted the Galactic Medical Council. They're sending a specialist transport to relocate the patient to a more appropriate facility. Appropriate facility. Sarah felt her temper rising. This is the best medical facility in 3 sectors. What's more appropriate than that? Facility equipped to handle dangerous predator species, Dr. Pixtel explained. We simply don't have the protocols or equipment to safely treat someone like him. Sarah stared at her colleagues in disbelief. You're talking about letting him die while we wait for someone else to decide where to send him. It's not that simple, Dr. Veloth protested. Catherians are apex predators. They're designed to hunt and kill creatures like us. My people have been prey to species exactly like his for millions of years. It's not just fear, it's evolutionary programming. It's unconscious. And dying, Sarah said flatly. Right now, he's not hunting anyone. It's a patient who needs help. The other doctors exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their discomfort with the entire situation. Sarah realized that this wasn't just about one patient. This was about The fundamental structure of galactic medicine, which had apparently been built around the assumption that predator and prey species could never safely interact in medical settings. The transport won't arrive for at least 6 hours, Dr. Veloth said. We'll do what we can to stabilize him until then. 6 hours? Sarah looked at the monitors again. Look at his blood pressure. Look at those internal bleeding indicators. He doesn't have 6 hours. She moved toward the chamber door, and instantly every alien in the room tensed. Dr. Chen, Dr. Veloth said urgently, you cannot enter that chamber. It's against every safety protocol we have. Your safety protocols are going to kill him, Sarah replied, entering her access code. Sarah, please, Dr. Pixtel said, using her first name in a way that emphasized how serious this was. We don't know anything about Catharian physiology. We don't know how they react to pain, to medical procedures, to being touched by unknown species. He could wake up and what? Eat me. Sarah paused at the chamber door. I've spent my entire career working with dangerous animals. I grew up on a farm where half the livestock could kill you if you weren't careful. I've performed surgery on injured wolves, treated wounded bears, and once spent 3 hours removing a fishing hook from an alligator's throat. The alien medical staff stared at her with expressions that ranged from admiration to complete incomprehension. Your species is insane, Dr. Veloth muttered, but there was something almost like respect in his voice. Maybe, Sarah agreed. Right now, that might be exactly what this patient needs. She entered the chamber before anyone could stop her. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving her alone with the galaxy's most dangerous patient. Up close, the Catharian was even more impressive. His breathing was shallow and labored, and she could see the full extent of his injuries. The energy burns were severe, probably from some kind of plasma weapon. The shrapnel in his shoulder was deep, and there were signs of additional injuries hidden beneath his thick fur, but what struck Sarah most was how young he looked. Despite his size and obvious strength, there was something almost vulnerable about his unconscious form. This wasn't some mindless killing machine. This was a person, hurt and far from home. Okay, big guy, she said softly, pulling on examination gloves. Let's see what we're dealing with. She started with a gentle touch, checking his pulse at his neck. His heart rate was fast but strong. His skin was warm, almost feverish, which was concerning. When she moved to examine the shrapnel wound, his eyes snapped open. Golden eyes, intelligent and alert, focused on her with the kind of predatory intensity that had probably been the last thing many creatures had seen. Sarah felt every instinct her ancestors had developed over millions of years screaming at her to run, to hide, to get away from this apex predator who was now fully aware of her presence. Instead, she kept her hands steady and her voice calm. Hey there, I'm Dr. Chen. I'm here to help you. The Catharian's eyes tracked her movements as she continued her examination. She could feel him evaluating her, trying to determine if she was a threat. When she gently probed near his wounds, he tensed but didn't pull away. You're hurt pretty badly, she continued, maintaining that same calm tone she'd used with countless injured animals. I need to treat these wounds, but it's going to be uncomfortable. You understand me? For a moment they just looked at each other. Then, incredibly, the Catharian gave a small nod. Through the viewing window, Sarah could see her colleagues watching in fascination and terror. Dr. Veloth had his hand hovering over what she assumed was the emergency lockdown button. The shrapnel has to come out, she told her patient. I'm going to give you something for the pain first, okay? She reached for a standard pain medication injector, then paused. Standard dosages were calculated for the average galactic citizen, which meant small herbivore species. For a creature of this size and build, the standard dose would be like giving an aspirin to an elephant. Computer, she called out. I need pharmacological data on Catharian physiology. No data available, came the mechanical response. Catharian medical information is classified under Apex Predator protocols. It was... Sarah looked at her patient, who was watching this exchange with obvious intelligence. Looks like we're going to have to figure this out together, she told him. I'm going to start with a dose that should work for someone your size, but you need to let me know if it's not enough, okay? She prepared an injection with triple the standard dose and administered it carefully. The Catherian's muscles relaxed slightly, which she took as a good sign. Better? She asked. Another small nod. Working carefully, Sarah began the delicate process of removing the shrapnel. The Catherian's claws dug into the examination table, but he remained still and cooperative. It was like performing surgery on a wild animal that had somehow decided to trust her completely. "You're doing great," she murmured as she worked. "Almost got it. ... There." The piece of metal came free with a small gush of dark blood. Sarah quickly applied pressure to control the bleeding while she prepared sutures. "Dr. Chen," came Dr. Velas's voice over the intercom. "Your patient's vitals are improving significantly." "Good to know," Sarah replied, beginning to close the wound. "How are you holding up out there? Anyone fainted yet?" Dr. Pixtel came. "Close when you gave him the injection," admitted Dr. Veloth. "But we're all still conscious." The Catherian made a sound that might have been amusement. Sarah looked at him and saw what could only be described as a slight smile. "Think that's funny, do you?" she asked. "Your presence is giving them existential crises and you're enjoying it." She moved on to treating the energy burns, which required careful cleaning and specialized medication. The Catherian endured it all with remarkable patience, occasionally making soft sounds that she interpreted as communication. "I wish I could understand what you're trying to tell me," Sarah said as she applied healing gel to the worst of the burns. "But we'll figure out proper communication later. Right now, let's just focus on getting you healthy." As she worked, Sarah became aware that more people were gathering outside the viewing window. Word had apparently spread through the station that someone was actually treating the apex predator patient. She could see maintenance workers, other medical staff, even what looked like some of the station's administrative personnel. "Quite an audience you're drawing," she told her patient. "I think you might be the first Catherian most of them have ever seen up close." The examination and initial treatment took nearly 2 hours. By the time Sarah was finished, the Catherian was resting more comfortably. His vital signs had stabilized, and the immediate threat to his life had passed. "You're going to be okay," she told him, cleaning her instruments. "You'll need to stay here for a few days while you heal, but the worst is over."
Ow.
The Catherian looked at her for a long moment, then did something that made everyone watching gasp in shock. He reached out with one massive clawed hand and gently touched Sarah's arm. Not grabbing, not threatening, just a simple gesture of gratitude. "You're welcome," Sarah said, covering his hand with hers. When she finally left the chamber, the corridor outside was packed with spectators. Dr. Veloth approached her with an expression she'd never seen before. "Dr. Chen," he said formally, "what you just did was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've witnessed in 30 years of medicine." "Probably both," Sarah admitted. "But he's stable now. The question is, what happens next?" Dr. Veloth looked back at the Catherian, who was resting peacefully for the first time since his arrival. "I think," he said slowly, "we're going to have to rewrite a lot of protocols." Sarah smiled. "Good. It's about time." As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah remained at the viewing window, watching her patient sleep. She'd just broken every rule the galactic medical community had about treating apex predators, and she had no idea what the consequences would be. But seeing the Catherian's peaceful breathing and stable vital signs, she knew she'd made the right choice. Sometimes, the best medicine was simply having the courage to care, regardless of what evolution and instinct tried to tell you about who deserved help and who didn't. The real challenge would come when he was fully conscious and mobile. That was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, she'd saved a life, and that was enough. Breaking barriers the next morning brought complications that Sarah hadn't anticipated. She arrived at the medical bay to find her Catherian patient sitting upright on the examination table, his golden eyes alert and focused on the door as if he'd been waiting for her. "Good morning," she said, checking his chart on her tablet. "Are you feeling?" The response came not in words, but in a series of growls, clicks, and what sounded like purring. Sarah realized that while the Catherian was clearly intelligent, they had no common language. "Computer," she called out, "activate. Universal Translator Protocol." "Universal Translator cannot process Catherian vocalizations," came the reply. Language patterns not in database. Of course not. Sarah was beginning to understand just how isolated the apex predator species had been from the rest of Galactic civilization. They existed on the edges, feared and avoided by everyone else. Dr. Veleth entered the chamber with obvious nervousness, staying close to the door. Dr. Chen, we've received word from the Galactic Medical Council. They're pleased with your decision to treat the patient. Are they going to do something about it? Sarah asked, not taking her eyes off her patient, who was watching Dr. Veleth with mild curiosity. They're sending an inspector to review our protocols and determine if any regulations were violated. Ara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Regulations about saving lives. That should be interesting. The Catherian made another series of sounds, and Sarah got the distinct impression he was asking about their conversation. She turned to him and tried to explain using simple gestures and words. Politics, she said, making what she hoped was a universal gesture of frustration. Bureaucrats who think rules are more important than helping people. To her surprise, the Catherian nodded and made a sound that was unmistakably derisive. Apparently, frustration with bureaucracy was truly universal. Over the next few hours, Sfera developed a routine of checking on her patient every 30 minutes. Each visit revealed something new about Catherian behavior and physiology. He was incredibly intelligent, quickly learning to associate certain sounds with specific actions. When she brought food, he waited for her to taste it first, a sign of both caution and respect. Most remarkably, he seemed genuinely curious about the other species on the station. When Dr. Pixtel finally worked up the courage to enter the chamber, the Catherian tilted his head and made soft, questioning sounds. Sarah realized he was trying to communicate with her colleague. He's asking about you, Sarah told Dr. Pixtel. I think he wants to know what species you are. Dr. Pixtel's feathers were still partially fluffed with nervousness, but she managed to speak. I'm a Varian. We evolved from ... from small ground birds. The Catherian made more sounds, gentler this time, and Sarah had the strange feeling he was trying to be reassuring. I think he's trying to tell you he's not going to hurt you, Sarah said. How can you possibly know that? Dr. Pixtel asked. Body language, tone, the same way you know when any animal is calm versus agitated. Sarah gestured to her patient. Look at him, really look. His posture is relaxed. His ears are forward, which in most mammals indicates curiosity, not aggression. His claws are retracted. Every signal he's giving says he's not a threat. Dr. Pixtel studied the Catherian carefully. You're right, he does seem ... peaceful. He is. The question is why. That afternoon brought Sarah's first real breakthrough. In communication, the Catherian had been watching her work with obvious interest, and when she brought him his medication, he pointed to the injector and made questioning sounds. Sarah realized he was asking what it was. She held up the device and said slowly, medicine, for pain. She pointed to his healing wounds, then made an exaggerated expression of discomfort. Followed by relief, the Catherian nodded and repeated her gesture, then pointed to himself and made sounds that were clearly meant to be words. Are you trying to tell me your name? Sarah asked, more sounds with clear emphasis on certain syllables. Computer, record these vocalizations and attempt phonetic translation, Sarah instructed. After several attempts, the computer suggested Zektar. The Catherian's ears perked up and he nodded enthusiastically. Zektar, Sarah repeated and was rewarded with what was unmistakably a pleased expression. She pointed to herself. Sarah. Zektar attempted, his accent making the simple name sound exotic. It was a small thing, but the exchange of names felt monumentous. For the first time in galactic history, a prey species and an apex predator had shared a moment of genuine communication and mutual recognition. Word of the breakthrough spread quickly through the station. By evening, there was a small crowd of off-duty personnel gathered outside the medical bay, hoping to catch a glimpse of the historic interaction. Dr. Veloth found Sarah in her office later that night, reviewing xenobiology texts and trying to understand more about Catherian physiology. You've caused quite a stir, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Half the station thinks you're a hero, and the other half thinks you're dangerously insane. What do you think? Sarah asked. Dr. Veleth was quiet for a long moment. I think you've shown us something important about ourselves. All our protocols, all our fears, they're based on instinct and evolutionary programming. But intelligence should be stronger than instinct, shouldn't it? That's what I'm hoping. The inspector from the medical council arrives tomorrow, Dr. Veloth warned. Inspector Colvin is known for being strict about regulations. Sarah nodded. I'll be ready. The next morning brought Inspector Colvin, a tall, thin alien with gray skin and the kind of demeanor that suggested he'd never met a regulation he didn't love. He spent an hour reviewing station protocols and incident reports before requesting to see the patient. Sarah led him to the medical bay, where Zektar was sitting up and attempting to communicate with Dr. Pixtel, who had been spending more time in the chamber as her fear gradually diminished. This is highly irregular, Inspector Colvin declared, studying Zektar through the viewing window. Apex predators are not treated in standard medical facilities. The risk to other patients and staff is unacceptable. Sarah asked. He's been here for 3 days. He's been cooperative, peaceful, and is recovering well. Where exactly is the risk? Inspector Colvin consulted his tablet. Regulation 447B clearly states that apex predator species require specialized containment and treatment protocols. This patient should have been transferred to a military medical facility. A military facility? Sarah felt her temper rising. He's not a prisoner of war. He's a patient. He's a member of a species that has been involved in numerous violent conflicts throughout galactic history. So have humans, Sarah pointed out. Are you suggesting we shouldn't receive medical treatment either? Inspector Colvin looked uncomfortable. That's different. Humans are ... complicated. Sarah realized she was seeing another layer of galactic prejudice she hadn't understood before. Humans were tolerated because they were useful, but they were still considered dangerous by many species. Inspector Dr. Veloth interjected. Perhaps you should observe an actual interaction before making your determination. Sarah looked at him gratefully. Despite his initial fears, Dr. Veloth was supporting her when it mattered. They entered the chamber together, and Sarah was pleased to see that Zektar remained calm despite the presence of strangers. She went through her routine examination, checking his wounds and updating his treatment plan. His recovery rate is remarkable, she told Inspector Colvin. Another day or two, and he'll be ready for discharge. Discharge to where? Inspector Colvin asked. His home world? Containment facility? Before Sarah could answer, Zektar made a series of urgent sounds and pointed toward the viewing window. Sarah looked and saw what had caught his attention. Through the medical bay's external viewport, a ship was approaching the station. But this wasn't a standard transport or medical vessel. It was clearly a Catherian ship, sleek and predatory in design. Oh, said Dr. Veloth, that's not good. The ship docked with the mechanical precision of a species that had mastered space travel through conquest rather than cooperation. Sarah could see the other station personnel gathering nervously in the corridors. They've come for him, Inspector Colvin said. This could be a diplomatic incident. Zektar was agitated now, making rapid sounds that Sarah was beginning to recognize as distress. He pointed to himself, then to the ship, then made slashing gestures across his throat. He's afraid, Sarah realized. He doesn't want to go with them. That's impossible, Inspector Colvin protested. Why would he fear? His own people? Sarah looked at Zektar's wounds again, really studying them for the first time. Energy burns from weapons. Shrapnel that could have come from an explosion. These weren't battle injuries from fighting other species, because they're the ones who hurt him, she said quietly. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Zektar wasn't a warrior who had been injured in battle. He was a refugee, fleeing from his own kind for reasons she couldn't understand but didn't need to question. That changes everything, Dr. Veloth said. Inspector Colvin was studying his tablet frantically. There's no protocol for this situation. Galactic law regarding asylum claims by apex predators is ... non-existent. Sarah placed a protective hand on Zektar's shoulder. Then we make new law. Through the viewport, she could see figures disembarking from the Catherian ship. They moved with the fluid grace of apex predators, but there was something menacing about their approach that made everyone on the station nervous. Station Commander to Medical Bay 7 came the announcement over the intercom. We have visitors requesting the return of their ... citizen. Sarah looked at Zektar, who was now clearly terrified despite his size and natural weapons. Whatever had happened between him and his people, he was genuinely afraid for his life. Not happening, she said firmly. Dr. Chen, Inspector Colvin warned, you cannot interfere with internal Catherian affairs. Watch me. Sarah activated the chamber's intercom. Station Commander, this is Dr. Chen. My patient is not ready for discharge. Medical authority supersedes diplomatic requests. There was a pause. Then, Dr. Chen, please report to Conference Room Alpha immediately. Sarah looked at her patient one more time. Zektar reached out and touched her hand gently, the same gesture of trust he'd shown after his surgery. Be back, she promised. As she left the medical bay, Sarah realized she was about to face the biggest challenge of her career. But looking back at Zektar, she knew she was ready to fight for him. Some things were more important than regulations, more important than fear, and more important than the comfortable prejudices that kept species apart. It was time to find out if the galaxy was ready for a new kind of medicine, one that treated all patients equally regardless of how many teeth they had. A new understanding. Conference Room Alpha felt like a courtroom as Sarah entered. Station Commander Rexel, a dignified reptilian species leader, sat at the head of the table. Across from him were 3 Catherians who radiated controlled menace. Despite their calm postures, Inspector Colvin sat to one side, his tablet ready to document what would likely be a diplomatic disaster. Dr. Chen, Commander Rexal began, these are representatives of the Catherian High Command. They've come to retrieve one of their people, the lead Catherian, whose dark fur bore elaborate markings that suggested high rank, spoke in perfect galactic standard. I am War Leader Drakon. The individual you are harboring is a convicted traitor. He must be returned for justice. Sarah felt her heart sink, but she kept her voice steady. Traitor to what? To his own kind? To the natural order? What? Golden eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. He refused a direct order to eliminate a colony of prey species that had violated territorial boundaries. He refused to commit genocide, Sarah translated. He refused to fulfill his evolutionary purpose, Drakon corrected. Catherians are apex predators. We maintain galactic balance by controlling prey species populations. This individual's conscience has made him unfit for duty? Sarah stared at him in disbelief. So you tried to kill him for having morals? You tried to correct his defective thinking? When that failed? Drakon shrugged. Weakness cannot be tolerated. Inspector Colvin was frantically taking notes. This is highly irregular. Galactic law recognizes species autonomy in internal affairs. Not when those internal affairs violate the basic principles of medical ethics, Sarah shot back. A patient who was tortured by his own people for refusing to commit mass murder? That's not internal politics. That's exactly the kind of situation that medical asylum was designed for. Commander Rexal looked uncomfortable. Dr. Chen, medical asylum has never been granted to an apex predator species. It's because no one ever tried, Sarah replied. The system is built on the assumption that predators and prey can't coexist peacefully. But Zektar proves that assumption is wrong. Drakon leaned forward. The individual's name is Zektar Nethai, and he is property of the Catherian High Command. His name is Zektar, and he's a person with rights, Sarah said firmly. Rights that include not being murdered for having a conscience. Dr. Chen, Inspector Colvin warned, you're creating an unprecedented situation. Good. It's about time. The argument continued for another hour with neither side willing to back down. Finally, Commander Rexel called for a recess. As the room emptied, Sarah found herself alone with Dr. Veloth, who had been quietly observing the proceedings. You realize what you're asking for? Said. If we grant asylum to Zektar, we're essentially declaring that the entire structure of galactic species relations is wrong. Maybe it is wrong, Sarah replied. Maybe the whole predator-prey divide is just an excuse for institutionalized prejudice. Doctor. Veleth was quiet for a moment. Knowing all my years of medicine, I've never questioned why we don't treat certain species. I just accepted it as natural law. I grew up on a farm, Sarah said. I learned early that natural law can be pretty stupid sometimes. Just because something is natural doesn't mean it's right. When the meeting reconvened, Sarah had a new strategy. Commander, I request permission to present evidence to support our asylum claim. What kind of evidence? Commander Rexal asked. Let me show you who Zektar really is. 20 minutes later, the entire group was gathered outside Medical Bay 7. Through the viewing window, they could see Zektar, sitting peacefully with Dr. Pixtel, who was showing him how to use the station's computer interface. As you can see, Sarah began, the patient has spent the last 4 days in close contact with prey species personnel. During that time, there have been 0 incidents of aggression or predatory behavior. Drakon sneered. Temporary conditioning. His true nature will reassert itself. Will it? Sarah opened the chamber door and gestured for everyone to enter. Let's find out. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Drakon and his companions tensed visibly, their own predatory instincts responding to being in close quarters with a perceived threat. Zektar, however, remained calm until he saw the other Catharians. The change was instantaneous. Zektar's entire posture shifted, his muscles tensing as he recognized his tormentors. A low growl rumbled from his chest, and for the first time since Sarah had known him, he looked genuinely dangerous. Zektar Nethi, Drakon commanded. Submit yourself for return to Catharian justice. Zektar's response was a snarl that made everyone except Sarah take a step backward. But then he looked at her and something remarkable happened. His aggressive posture melted away, replaced by the calm demeanor she'd come to know. Sarah walked over to stand beside him, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. Zektar, these people want to take you back. Do you want to go with them? Zektar looked directly at Drakon and spoke clearly in Galactic standard. His accent thick, but his words unmistakable. No, stay, Sarah, friends. The room fell silent. Spectre Colvin was the first to speak. He learned our language. Intelligence, Sarah said simply. Catharians are highly intelligent. Given the opportunity to communicate, they're just as capable of peaceful interaction as anyone else. Dr. Pixtel, who had been frozen in terror when the other Catharians entered, slowly stepped forward. He's been learning from our computer systems, she said quietly. He asked me to teach him. He wanted to understand us. Dracon's eyes narrowed. Deception. Predators learn prey behavior to hunt more effectively. Is that why he saved those colonists? Sarah asked. To hunt them better, the colonists were weak. Their elimination would have strengthened the galactic ecosystem. Zektar made a sound of disgust and spoke again, his words halting but clear. Wrong, strong, protect weak, this is honor. The philosophical divide couldn't have been clearer. On one side stood the traditional Catharian view of strength through dominance, and on the other stood Zektar's belief in strength through protection. Commander Rexal had been quietly observing the exchange. Now he stepped forward. War Leader Drakon, your request is noted. However, this station operates under Galactic Medical Authority jurisdiction. Dr. Chen, as attending physician, has the right to determine when her patient is ready for discharge. And I determine he's not ready, Sarah said immediately. Drakon. Claws extended slightly. This is interference in Catharian internal affairs. This is medical care, Commander Rexal replied firmly. Unless you're suggesting we should violate the Galactic Medical Convention? The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but it was interrupted by an alarm. Red lights began flashing throughout the station, and an automated voice announced, Emergency. Hull breach in Section 7. All emergency personnel respond immediately. Through the medical bay's external viewport, Sarah could see something. That made her heart race. A massive ship, easily 10 times the size of anything she'd seen before, was approaching the station. Its design was unlike anything in her experience, covered in organic-looking protrusions and moving with an undulating motion that suggested it was more grown than built. What is that? Dr. Pixtel whispered. Zektar looked out the viewport and made a sound of recognition, but not fear. He spoke rapidly in his own language, then switched to Galactic Standard. Galkari, Ancient Ones, they come. Commander Rexall was receiving reports through his communicator. The ship isn't attacking. It's ... requesting permission to dock. The Valkyrie are myth, Inspector Colvin protested. Ancient stories about the first sapient species? No myth, Zektar said firmly. Real, old, wise. Looked at Sarah with something approaching reverence. They come for healing truth. It's the massive ship docked with impossible precision. Its organic-looking appendages interfacing with the station's mechanical systems in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Moments later, Commander Rexall's communicator buzzed again. Commander, came his aide's voice. We have ... visitors. They're requesting to see the Catherian patient and his human doctor. Sarah felt a chill of anticipation mixed with dread. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than a simple asylum case. The Valkyrie who entered the medical bay 20 minutes later defied every assumption Sarah had about alien species. They moved like living shadows, their forms seeming to shift and flow rather than walk. When they spoke, it was in harmonics. That seemed to resonate directly in her mind. Greetings, young healer, one of them said, addressing Sarah directly. We have traveled far to witness this moment. What moment? Sarah asked. The moment when the ancient barriers begin to fall. When prey learns that predators can choose compassion, and predators learn that strength comes from protection rather than domination. Drakon stepped forward aggressively. The Catherian High Command does not recognize your authority here. The Valkyrie turned their attention to him, and Sarah felt the temperature in the room seem to drop. Child of hunters, your people have forgotten the old truths. We remember when your ancestors first chose to hunt for survival rather than sport. We remember when they learned to protect their young, their weak, their injured. That is when they became truly strong. Ancient history, Drakon snarled. Evolution has moved beyond such weakness, has it? The Valkyrie gestured toward Zektar. If this one chose to protect instead of destroy, his reward was exile and injury. Yet he found healing among those his people taught him to fear. Which path shows greater evolution? Zektar spoke up, his voice stronger now. I learned from Sarah, from Pixtel, from all here. They show me. ... Predator and prey can be friends, can help each other. This is new way, better way. There's no new way. Drakon insisted. There is only strength and weakness, hunter and hunted. The lead Valkyr moved closer to him. Then explain why you fear one injured exile enough to bring 3 warriors to retrieve him. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah realized that Drakon's presence here wasn't just about retrieving a traitor. It was about preventing an idea from spreading. You're afraid, she said suddenly. You're afraid that other Catherians will see what Zektar has accomplished and start questioning the old ways. Drakon's silence was answer enough. Inspector. Colvin had been frantically updating his reports. This is unprecedented. We have no protocols for Valkyrie intervention in asylum cases. Then make new protocols, the Valkyrie said. The galaxy is changing, Inspector. The old divisions between species are becoming obsolete. Those who adapt will thrive. Those who cling to ancient prejudices will find themselves irrelevant. Commander Rexall stepped forward. Station Commander, I have the authority to grant temporary asylum while this case is reviewed by the full Galactic Council. Unacceptable, Drakon protested. Final Commander Rexall replied. The Catherian war leader looked around the room, taking in the united front of species that should have been natural enemies. Finally, he spoke. This is not over. Command will not forget this interference. We count on it, the Valkyrie replied. Change is never comfortable for those in power. After the Catherians departed, Sarah found herself alone with Zektar and the Valkyrie. The ancient beings seemed genuinely curious about the relationship that had developed between human and Catherian. How did you know to trust him? One of them asked Sarah. I didn't at first, Sarah admitted. But I've learned that intelligent beings, regardless of species, respond to compassion and respect. Zektar chose to trust me first. I just returned the favor. And you, young hunter? They asked Zektar. What did you learn from this experience? Zektar thought carefully before answering. I learned that strength is not about causing fear. True strength is about creating trust. Sarah showed me this. Valkyrie made sounds that might have been approval. The galaxy has much to learn from both of you. Over the following weeks, Nexus Station became something unprecedented in Galactic history, a truly integrated medical facility. Word of Zektar's successful treatment spread, and other apex predator species began requesting medical services. Each case required careful handling, but Sarah's protocols proved effective. Dr. Pixtel became the station's first specialist in predator psychology, developing communication techniques that allowed medical staff to work safely with species they'd previously feared. Dr. Velos started a research program studying the medical applications of interspecies cooperation. Zektar, fully recovered from his injuries, chose to remain on the station as a cultural liaison. His presence helped other apex predator patients feel safe, while his gentle demeanor gradually reduced the fears of prey species staff. You've started something bigger than you realize. Dr. Velith told Sarah one evening as they watched Zektar help a injured draconian patient communicate with the medical team. I just treated a patient, Sarah replied. Everything else followed from that. That's the point. You didn't see an apex predator or a dangerous alien. You saw someone who needed help. Sarah smiled as she watched Zektar gently encourage the draconian to trust the medical scanners. That's all any of us are, really. Just people who sometimes need help. 6 months later, the Galactic Medical Council officially adopted the Nexus protocols, establishing standards for treating all sapient species regardless of their evolutionary background. The old barriers between predator and prey weren't eliminated overnight, but they were cracking. Sarah often thought about that first day when Zektar had arrived, broken and bleeding, and how everyone except her had been too afraid to help. It reminded her that progress often began with a single person deciding to do what was right instead of what was safe. The galaxy was vast and full of different species with different ways of life. But underneath all the claws and teeth and evolutionary programming, they were all just people trying to survive and find their place in the universe. Sometimes that was enough to build a bridge across millions of years of fear. And sometimes, all it took was one doctor willing to look past the teeth and see the person underneath.